Next up, the District Attorney of York County. He is Dave Sunday. He has been a newsmaker here of late. And I wanted to lead into him our question of the day today. You can find it at facebook.com/910WSBA. I hope all of you will take a chance to get in there and talk about it. But the question is this: for our local leaders, who are they responsible to? Semicolon. The people and their Constitution, or the governor making the rules during this time of emergency? And Leanne wrote in here just a moment ago, and she said they were hired by the voters, and thus are responsible to us. We are their bosses. If they don't follow the Constitution, they will not be rehired. I couldn't agree with her more. And we go to Dave Sunday this morning, who himself has been a newsmaker here of late. Good morning, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Gary. How are you this morning?
We're doing very well. Obviously, a lot of people keeping their eyes on what's going on right now with regard to many of the counties here talking about, not many, I should say a number of the counties here in the state of Pennsylvania talking about reopening, despite the fact they're still considered red, and they're saying going to yellow, which I think in their minds really means going to green, even though that's not what it is. But you had a memo that came out over the weekend, and you talked about, you've been put into a situation where you have to carry out either the governor's rules right now or the Constitution here in Pennsylvania. How do you view this? And you talk a little bit about your memo, if you would. And I know other district attorneys wrote the same kinds of memos, too, around the state of Pennsylvania.
That's right, Gary. And just to start with your question of the day, I would say that those two things are not always mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. There's many times, in fact, the vast majority of times, where elected officials that you may disagree with are following the Constitution. You just may disagree with maybe how it's being applied or how that's being.
Let me clarify that, Dave, before you go on, and let me add something to it, just so you know the context in which I mean it anyway, and the context in which I mean it is when the governor is controlling things for an indeterminable amount of time. Okay, emergency is one thing, but how long does that go on before the government of the people becomes the governor, the government of the governor? That's my point in saying that when someone takes an emergency situation and then, conscious or unconscious, turns it into the way we are going to govern from now on. That's my point in making that statement. But go ahead.
No, I appreciate that, Gary, and I think that and I think that you see sort of my answer in action in the form of the memo that my office put out on Friday, and that many other district attorneys across the state have put out similar memos as well. And you asked me about that, and I'd like to talk about it very briefly.
Sure.
To start with, I want to make it very clear to everyone that's listening that I think that COVID-19 is obviously a very serious disease that is clearly killing certain people. And I think that we all need to take that into consideration as we go about our processing of this entire situation. With that being said, the memo that we wrote in my office was to make sure that it was crystal clear to police what my expectation was and how my office would be handling these citations. It's important to understand that a memo of this nature is in response to being asked the question from a police department, hey, can you provide us in writing with what your opinion is on this? And Gary, we put a tremendous amount of time and thought into this answer for police. And I think that shows and it bears out through, if anyone has read the memo that is up on our Facebook page.
Right.
And so with regard to that, Gary, I want to start with right off the bat that this memorandum reflects the following statement that I think is really the most important statement in the entirety of the memorandum. And what that says is citizens cannot be subjected at risk of criminal penalty. That's a criminal penalty. To restrictions whose terms continuously change. Rapid changes in the definition of what constitutes criminal conduct renders the application of criminal law as arbitrary and impossible to follow or defend against. And that, Gary, is the it's at the crux of the memo. Very simply, we are in a situation now where it is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. We have individuals who have applied for waivers and have waited for weeks and weeks to get one. We have other individuals who have received waivers that are similarly situated with regard to their business to other businesses that have not. And we really are in a situation now where the application of that $200 fine, and people need to remember, this is a summary citation $200 fine, and that's the max is $200. That we are in a situation now where application of that has really, in my opinion, been rendered impossible to do so in a fair basis because the circumstances are changing by the week, if sometimes by the day.
Let me ask you this question, Dave. You know, we ask citizens to abide by the rule of law, and yet, you know, we have various law enforcement groups that are saying, but I'm not going to arrest people for that, even though technically or legally I could. And so people are, you know, we want to keep the rule of law. We want to keep respect for the rule of law, and no one is more important in that than you are in making sure that's carried out. And yet at the same time, you know, we're saying, but at what point in time do we say, well, maybe the way that a lot of this is being carried out is not consistent, is not right, and we have to look to the people who are the government to see what the right thing is to do, and more importantly, the Constitution that protects those people being the government. That's kind of a weird question or a statement, but I wanted to let you kind of play with that a little bit if you could.
Well, I want to start with the rule of law is more important now than ever. The rule of law is what makes, and we've talked about this long before the pandemic. The rule of law is what makes this nation great. It's what separates us from pretty much the rest of the world. And we have a whole plethora of laws that exist that are being enforced every single day. The difference in this circumstance is that this is based on an administrative order. And the administrative order by itself is constitutional. It's according to...
I know that.
Yep, it is constitutional. The issue for me as the DA elected by the people is that when I'm viewing this citation, because of the nature of the shifting landscape of all the different moving to the different colors for counties, some people have waivers and others don't. It truly has become almost impossible to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone had the intent to violate that criminal citation. And so I have an ethical duty as a prosecutor, as an attorney, as a DA, to not bring a charge if I don't believe in the beginning, if I don't have a good faith basis to believe that I can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is what has, in my opinion, has occurred with regard to this citation. It is constitutional. Go ahead.
Right. And you can add to that it's also, I think, a Chamber of Commerce public relations nightmare when people do that. And I know sometimes you have to do that despite any publicity that's going to come out of it. Dave Sunday, our district attorney of York County, and a caller just called in and said, could you dumb it down a little bit for him? He said he wasn't quite sure what the crux of your memorandum was, Dave. So if you could summarize that very quickly, just for someone who wasn't really understanding what you're trying to get across, we want to make sure that's clear.
Well, Gary, I think two things. The first one is anyone can go on to the York County District Attorney Office Facebook page, and it's posted there, so they can read it in its entirety. But the purpose of this, after being asked the question by law enforcement, what is my guidance? I mean, the crux here very simply is that we have instructed the police departments that the District Attorney's Office will not be prosecuting that criminal citation. I think it's very important, however, for people to understand that this is only a small piece of the pie, meaning there are there are civil ramifications. There are administrative matters that are beyond the scope and standing of the York County District Attorney's Office. And it's
Right.
inappropriate for me to give legal opinion or advice on any of those civil or administrative ramifications. I think it's important for people to understand that, and that's because the reality is the hammer that can come from that place is actually, in my opinion, a lot stronger than what could come from a non-traffic citation.
What's that website they can go to, Dave, to get your Facebook page?
Well, they can go to the York County District Attorney's Office website. It's located there. And so that would be www.yorkcountyda.com, or they can go to the York County District Attorney's Office Facebook page.
There are many people, and one great example is Round the Clock Diner publicly, and we've all seen that opened up the other day in defiance of the governor's order and allowed in-restaurant service. The governor has come out in the last 2 days ago with, I guess you'd have to call them threats against those who would open before the state says it's okay. And boy, do we bristle when we hear the state. At least a lot of us do. Some maybe don't, but I do. I don't like hearing the state telling us it's okay. How do you react to the threats of, and calling acts cowardly acts by local officials and, abandoning the ship, so to speak, here because the COVID-19 is dictating the schedule? Your reaction to that as a public official? Well,
the 2 points I'd like to make there, Gary. The first one is that, and I want to circle back because this is very important. It is very important for people to understand that, and I want to clarify this, that that I am in no way advocating for businesses to open. I'm not advocating for people to do these different, I'll say, acts of defiance. My role is extremely limited, and my role is the role of prosecuting cases and making this determination that I made here with regard to prosecutorial discretion. And I just say that because you asked me what my thoughts are on the statements made by the governor. Mm-hmm. I really don't have any, and I say that just because I, as the DA, and I know this may come as a huge surprise for a lot of listeners here, I get threatened and called names almost every day. And so, right. We do our job. We do it to the best of our ability. We put all of our combined knowledge and time and training into doing this the right way. It is so important for people to understand, Gary, during this time, that the rule of law is more important now than ever. And my statement in giving this to the police and giving them this guidance is in no way an indictment on anyone's thoughts and that includes the governor.
Right. Well, let me ask you another question then here, because we only have about a minute and 45 to go. It looks to a lot of people like, and I understood the other day that around the clock, for example, 2 state policemen showed up and asked about this, and I don't know what else ensued, but I don't believe that they pressed charges. That, and we're seeing a lot of local police saying, hey, we're not, we're along with you here, District Attorney, okay? But the state police are a different matter, and it's almost as though if the governor makes these rules and says, I want them carried out, it's going to be done by the state police as opposed to local law enforcement. And I'm not saying that as a blanket thing. I'm saying as a general perception right now. About a minute left. Am I wrong on that? Is that what it's coming down to now? The state police are kind of the arm of the governor, and the local police are kind of the arm of the people. Is that what we're looking at here?
No, Gary. They all. The state police, of course, technically by law, they are the arm of the state. They're the state police.
Right.
However, everybody follows the same set of laws. And so if the Pennsylvania State Police files a citation, that citation is handled by the local district attorney's office.
Okay.
That is why, Gary, and we've talked about this so many times, it is so important that district attorneys are elected, because having my position be elected gives the power to the people. And if the people don't like what I do, they can get rid of me. They can get a different.
And we'll have to end at that point today. Dave Sunday, District Attorney of York County, here on WSBA.